Hey there, folks. It's Liz from West Star Tarot. And this afternoon, I wanted to make a video in response to Natalia over at Ouroboros. And it's her Council of Seven. And so what she has asked folks to do is to take 7 decks that you can use under the guise of advisors. So in the realm of yourself, not just operating alone, but should you need, and we all do, need advice, who can you call on for advice? Who can be sitting at your council, your table, that can act as your advisors? And so I thought about this for a couple of days. And I came up with several decks. And interestingly, as I was pulling the decks out to get ready to film this, at the last minute, I took one out and added one in. So I will mention that as we get going. But I wanted to say, starting out, my first deck that I want on my Council of Advisors would be the Mother Peace deck. And that is for a number of reasons. One part reason is that it was my first deck, and I never was called to look at, to get a tarot deck or to get into tarot until I saw the Mother Peace deck. And I was in graduate school at the time in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And during my break time, I used to leave the library and walk down Massachusetts Avenue to a really great store that I wish was still there, Arsenic and Old Lace. And they sold all kinds of witch supplies, including tarot decks. And I saw this deck, and I was immediately attracted to it and had to buy it right away because it was a feminist deck. And I had no idea that there were feminist decks. This was in the 1980s, maybe 1983 or 4. And this deck had been out for a number of years, maybe 5 years at that time. And I just thought, oh my gosh, it's a round deck. It's a feminist deck. And so I bought it. And it was the only deck I had for many years. So anyway, this deck I still love. I don't use as much, but making this video makes me realize I do need to use it more. And it's sort of interesting. I didn't realize at the time until I started using a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, maybe, I don't know, just a few years ago. So there was probably about 25 years between when I bought this deck and when I used a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And as I was using the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, becoming familiar with it and studying it, I realized, oh, Mother Peace has nods to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and obviously was influenced by the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And so I wanted to just show a couple of cards that I thought do show the influence of the Rider-Waite-Smith. So here's the 7 of Swords. So you can see you get that kind of sneaky Pete feeling. And then here's the 8 of Swords. And so you can see, yes, this woman is trapped, but if she would just turn around, there's a whole opening right there. And here's the 3 of Cups, which is, reminiscent of Pamela Coleman Smith's. And then here we see the 2 of Swords. And then there are a few cards that I wanted to show that were different. So instead of the Hermit, we have the Crone. And of course, I love the Crone. I love having the Crone in this deck. And then this is the 10 of Swords, which is very different from the Rider-Waite-Smith version. And then the Eight of Cups, which, oops, which reminds me of the Seven of Cups more than the Rider-Waite-Smith Eight of Cups. So this was a deck that I used for many, many years, and it informed my early days of learning tarot. And I had no idea, as I said, that it had anything to do with Rider-Waite-Smith. Another deck that I'm going to count as one with the Mother piece. It's also a feminist, has a feminist voice, and I would definitely want, as advisors on my council, feminist voices. And this is Daughters of the Moon, which is giant. It's way bigger than the Mother piece. I can't shuffle this deck. And I got this deck not much, maybe a couple years after, no, I don't know, a few years after I had the Mother piece. And I also got it at Arsenic and Old Lace. And the version that I had for many, many years was this black and white version. And Fiona Morgan, who was the main inspiration behind this deck, it's matte and it's really thin, but it's made to be colored in. And because I am artistically challenged, I kept thinking I would color it in, but I never did because I was afraid I would wreck the deck. And so I did not. And I'm really glad I didn't, because soon thereafter, well, no, maybe about 10 years ago, I don't know, they came out with a color version of, and this is the Moon card to me. Not deception, not all that stuff that you hear about in the Rider-Waite-Smith. It's about the sacred feminine and the influence that La Luna has on us, our bodily fluids, the earth's fluids, the beautiful light she shines down upon us, the cycles, her waxing and waning, and the different attitudes and emotions that come across during her cycles and our cycles. And so I would want those two round decks with feminist voices on my council of advisors. And I count on those decks, and I'm going to listen closely to them and what they have to say. So I would also want on my council the voice of the plant spirits. I'm an herbalist, and I work closely with plant spirits. And I live in a climate where for much of the year the plant spirits are underground. And so when that happens, I have my tinctures and my teas and my flower essences that I've made to keep me company. But I would also want the plant spirits represented in a tarot deck. And so that is why I would choose to have the herbal tarot on my council of 7. This is a very interesting deck. It is Rider-Waite-Smith based. And a lot of the cards, I can't quite put together how Michael Tierra, the herbalist who was part of the creative team on this deck, I don't know why he picked certain plants to go with the cards, and yet other cards I can tell really easily. So for example, they have the High Priest instead of the Hierophant, and it's sage, which makes sense. The Nine of Swords is Valerian, and so if you think of the Nine of Swords as a card that keeps you awake at night, Valerian is a card you would take for insomnia. So that makes sense. The Star is Skullcap, and it's a lovely, uplifting, calming, beautiful herb. So I get that, how that goes with the star, and then the High Priestess is Peony. So I definitely need to have that deck in my council. I listen to the plant spirits. They talk to me and advise me, and I would want to hear from them if decisions I was making about the realm of my body and the world around me were in any way harmful to the plant spirits or to Gaia. And I know that this deck would help inform me of that. So I also thought I would like to have a Rider-Waite-Smith deck as the voice of tradition and the voice of history and the voice of a strong voice of where tarot has come from. And so I decided, I took a look at my multiple Rider-Waite-Smith decks, and I decided to go for the a Carol Herzer deck that I have, which is the Starlight Illuminated. And I love this deck. When I use it for clients, people really love it, but it has a really clear voice, and I find it to be extremely readable, and so I can relate to it. I can understand it. I can understand the voice of this deck when it talks to me, and so I would like to have it on my council of 7 because I feel like it's very clear and speaks to me with reason, and as I said, it's very understandable. I just pulled out the aces. So there's the sword, the wand, the beautiful Ace of Cups, and the Ace of Pentacles. So that is the deck I have included as the voice of tradition. And then I thought, well, I also need to have a deck that's going to be in my face. If I am heading in a direction of making wrong decisions, or if I'm deluding myself, or if I am acting in a way that is negatively impacting others, I would want a deck that would basically call me out on my shit. And so I decided I would include New Era Elements Tarot. I love this deck. This is a deck that is so perfect for the times that we who live in the United States are experiencing now. And I want this deck on my council because it speaks loudly, clearly, and it doesn't sugarcoat things. Sometimes I've heard people comment that they can't look at this deck. It offends them. Animal cruelty, but it doesn't support animal cruelty. It's calling out animal cruelty, and it doesn't support racism and genocide. It's calling out racism and genocide, and so that's why I would want to have this deck on my council. Here's a few cards. So here we are. Am I being wasteful of water? Am I not being mindful of our finite resources? I would want this deck to call me out and say, hey, get with it. Here we see, this is a turtle that has plastic around it. So again, am I not being mindful of how I'm consuming, and am I recycling and so forth? Yes, again, we can see this deck is in your face. I originally was going to have an animal deck because I wanted the voice of the animals on my council as well. And that was the switch out that I made at the last minute. I took out the animal deck and I put a different deck in. So I think all the decks that I have chosen have animals in them. And so I feel that the voice of the animals definitely will come through in the New Era elements, but in all the decks. So instead of an animal deck, I decided to have the Druid craft because this speaks to my roots. My relatives, before they came to this country, my dad was first generation American, and my grandparents were from Scotland. And when I've gone back to Scotland to visit my family there, I could tell that there was some Druidic influences in my family. And so I thought I would want to have this because of my spiritual beliefs and because of my ancestors. And so again, I pulled out the aces. I think these aces are particularly beautiful. There's the Ace of Swords, the Ace of Wands, and again we can see there are animals in these cards as well. Ace of Cups. And one of the most beautiful tarot cards I've ever seen in my life is the Ace of Pentacles from the Druid craft. And so I would want the wise wisdom of the Druids and the Druid craft tarot on my Council of Seven, especially when I'm thinking about things in the realm of spirit and my spiritual practice and my spiritual development. And then I would also want to have the voice of the goddess on my Council of Seven. And so I decided that I would have the Mythical Goddess Tarot on my council. There were a couple other goddess decks that I could have picked, but for some reason I went with this one. The goddess will speak to me through this deck. Here are a couple of cards from this deck. This is Gaia, the world, and I love how she's represented. So many times the way I see Gaia portrayed on oracle and tarot cards, it just, I don't know, it's just wrong. This one really strikes me as a beautiful representation of Gaia and how I would personify Gaia other than the earth herself. We have Kali as the death card, Ishchel as the moon card, Pele as the tower, really perfect, isn't it? Shakti as, whoops, sorry, I dropped Shakti, as the lovers, Kuan Yin as the empress, and Mary Magdalene. I love seeing Mary Magdalene as, I don't know why, 15, but she calls it initiation, not the devil. I hope there's no implication there. And then finally, I wanted to have my ancestors represented. I wanted the voice of ancestors, not just mine, but of all the ancestors to be on my council. I think it's really important to think about those who have come before us and their wisdom and the words that they can share with us to teach us. And so I decided to include the Ancestral Path Tarot. And again, this is a deck that sometimes pays homage to Rider-Waite-Smith and sometimes doesn't. I decided to pull out all four of the queens so you can see the ways that different people of the world are represented. So the suit of swords, this is the Queen of Swords, represents people from Japan and Asia. And then staves or wands is Africa. The Queen of Cups, or the Suit of Cups, is Camelot, so represents the Caucasian race. And then the Queen of Sacred Circles, or Pentacles, so the Suit of Pentacles is Indigenous Americans. There are a couple cards I just wanted to point out that I particularly like in this deck. Look at the Hierophant. I want this voice on my council. These are wise women who can see and give me good advice. And then the Strength card I particularly like as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's it. That's 7. I wanted to thank Natalia for starting this tag. It really, I thought about it quite a bit. And I tried to express how these voices would be important to me, and the advice that they could give me would be important to me. And as I move forward, I'm going to keep this in mind, and when I have particular questions or I'm struggling with certain things, I know now I have these decks that I can ask to counsel me in these particular ways that I've mentioned. Peace.